I stood at the head of the conference table on the 37th floor of West Point Tower, Midtown Manhattan. The LED lights reflected off the polished glass surface, casting faint glimmers on the brass insignias across my uniform. I placed my beret on the table and met every eye in the room except his. Not yet. 6 years ago, I was just another temporary admin in this very company. A pretty face, a tight pencil skirt, a laugh that didn't come from the gut. To them, I was decorative, particularly to Matthew Sloan, the CEO of Westera Systems, who now sat stiffly 3 chairs down, staring at the stripes on my shoulder like they were ghosts from his past. My name is Amelia Hart, 31 years old, full colonel in the United States Army, assigned to Cyber Command, and today, I'm the official Pentagon liaison with full authority to approve or terminate the $180 million A7 Sentinel military tech contract. What they don't know yet is that the very backbone of Sentinel's encryption protocol was written by me under a classified pseudonym 4 years ago. And he's the reason I never put my real name on it. Back then, I was fresh out of a military transition program, bright, broke, and full of fire. I joined Westera's East Virginia office, assigned to the executive wing, day 3 on the job. Matthew cornered me by the copier, his cologne musky and cheap despite his designer suit. "You're wasted behind a desk." "Amelia," he said, eyes lingering far too long on my chest. "Ever think of being my executive assistant comes with perks, private dinners, real mentorship?" He meant exactly what it sounded like. That night, everyone else had left. I stayed to finish formatting slides for a board review. He came back into the office, said he forgot something, closed the door behind him. I was wearing that cream blouse, the one with the soft fabric that always clung too tightly around the arms. I remember because when he brushed past me, his fingers slipped between my shoulder blades and hovered. I flinched. He whispered, "This shirt, it'd look even better on the floor." I didn't scream. I didn't run. I froze, smiled politely, and filed for department transfer 2 days later. No questions asked. No accountability held. So why am I here now? Because those touches never disappeared. They lingered in every boardroom I entered. Every male superior who accidentally grazed my waist or asked if I was single and ambitious. I buried it. I built from it. And eventually, I outranked all of them. "Colonel Hart," said Lorraine Myers, the project executive, standing near the screen. "We weren't expecting someone of your rank. Thank you for coming in person. I felt it necessary." I replied, voice calm. "Project Sentinel has several anomalies in its network integrity reports. I intend to verify everything budget, execution, and ethical oversight." My eyes flicked back to Matthew. His face was pale now, the sharp jaw clenched, one thumb running nervously along his tie seam. He didn't recognize me at first when I walked in. Now he's remembering what he said, what he touched, what he dismissed. The irony, my presence here isn't revenge. Not exactly. It's protocol. It's justice. And I could already sense the question forming in the back of his mind. What does she know? How much did she see? I walked to the placard labeled Colonel Amelia Hart, pulled out my laptop, and sat down, back straight, shoulders squared. The energy in the room shifted. Men who once might have ignored me now glanced nervously between each other, unsure of where the hierarchy truly stood. "We'll begin with a simple question," I said, eyes scanning the room. "Who authored the first iteration of the Sentinel encryption framework?" Matthew inhaled sharply. Didn't speak. I smiled, just slightly. He has no idea that I already know the answer. But why have I waited until now to make myself known? I can still remember the first time Matthew touched me. Not in the accidental brush of hands or the lingering glance way. No. It was deliberate, intentional. His office door had just clicked shut behind him, locking us both inside the executive suite. The lights were dim, the rest of the office empty. He leaned back against his mahogany desk and looked me up and down like I was an indulgence he hadn't yet unwrapped. "You're different from the others," he said, voice low, heat flickering behind his eyes. "Smarter, hungrier, and that's exciting." I stood frozen by the window, wearing a button-up blouse I'd ironed that morning and a skirt that, in hindsight, I wish I'd left in the closet. But the truth is, it wouldn't have mattered what I wore. His hands still would have wandered. He stepped closer, slowly, giving me time to flinch, to react, but I didn't. Maybe I was too shocked, too naive. Maybe I just needed the job that badly. His fingers slid along the waistband of my skirt, a ghost of a touch that made my spine go rigid. I remember the faint rasp in his breath as he whispered, "You could be something more here. All it takes is saying yes." Did I say yes? Not exactly. I didn't scream either. I smiled, small, sharp, and I said, "Is that an official offer?" "Sir." That single word, "sir," stung him. It reminded him that, despite the distance he was trying to erase between us, I wasn't his to control. His hand froze midair. I turned, picked up my folder, and walked out. The next day, he transferred me to inventory control in a different building. No warning, no meeting. Just a 2-line memo in my inbox, effective immediately. Just like that. My access badge didn't work at the front door anymore. And yet, I didn't quit. Why didn't I go to HR? Why didn't I press charges? Because in those days, I thought silence was strength. I thought surviving was the same as winning. Now I know better. Back in the boardroom, he still won't meet my eyes. "Would you like to answer the question, Mr. Sloan?" I ask again, this time with a hint more steel. He clears his throat. "The original framework was developed by our R&D contractor," he says quickly, "not in-house. I believe the code name was Raven Protocol." There it is. The room shifts. Someone whispers the name again. Raven Protocol. I lean back in my chair, arms folded. Raven Protocol was developed under DoD supervision in 2020. It's currently classified Tier 2. You don't have clearance for that name, Mr. Sloan. So I'll ask again, how did your company obtain that code? He blinks. We didn't. That must be a coincidence. I don't respond. I simply click on my laptop and cast the screen onto the projector. A string of code appears dense, elegant, unmistakable. Then a second string. Westera's version. Identical. Murmurs rise. Lorraine shifts in her seat. Matthew looks like he's about to choke. His jaw tenses. This must be a mix-up. A subcontractor reused a template. Maybe. No, I say. That code was written by one person, and that person I looked directly at him was me. The room falls silent. Lorraine leans forward. "Colonel Hart, are you saying you authored the original Sentinel framework?" I nod. Matthew finally speaks again, this time lower, almost a hiss. "This is retaliation, isn't it?" I smile, slow and deliberate. Retaliation would be me filing a formal sexual misconduct report and dragging you through federal review. This is oversight. You stole government code, rebranded it, and repackaged it for military use without authorization. That's fraud. His face pales. Beads of sweat gather along his hairline. No one comes to his defense. But as I look at him now, this man who once stood too close, who thought my body was currency, something in me twists. Why didn't I destroy him back then? Why wait 6 years to show up in uniform, armed with code and authority? Because I had to build something first. I had to become undeniable. And now, I was moving on, I say, turning to Lorraine. I'll need full access to the project documentation, subcontractor logs, and internal communications between your team and all R&D affiliates over the last 24 months. Of course, Lorraine replies quickly. Matthew doesn't say another word. He simply slumps back in his chair like he's aged 10 years in 10 minutes. As I scroll through my notes, I catch a glimpse of his hands shaking slightly. I remember those same hands pressing into the small of my back. I remember the way he once whispered, "You'll never make it far in this world playing by the rules." I played by my rules, Matthew, and look where we are now. But he still doesn't know the rest. He doesn't know what I carried with me when I left that office 6 years ago, or who. He has no idea what I've kept hidden, and why it's about to change everything. The Arlington apartment wasn't much. A third-floor walk-up with a cracked balcony, old plumbing, and paper-thin walls that echoed the neighbors' arguments like they were my own. But it was the only place that would rent to me with no job, no references, and a belly that would soon give me away. I was 5 weeks late when the test turned positive. Alone in the bathroom, staring at that little blue cross. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared. Was it Matthews? It had to be. He was the only man I'd been with in over a year, if you could even call that night being with someone. Half coercion, half heat of the moment desperation. I couldn't even remember who reached for whom first. What I did remember was the way he zipped up his pants after and said, "Don't get any ideas." I sent him a single message, short, clinical, "I'm pregnant. I think it's yours." No reply. Not even a read receipt. And I didn't follow up. Why didn't I delete it all? Why didn't I scream his name into the void and burn the whole thing down? Because the silence told me everything I needed to know. I worked nights at a diner off Route 50, scraping tips from truckers and drunk college kids. My belly grew under layers of oversized uniforms. No one asked. No one cared. I studied during the day, sleeping in snatches between coding exercises and nausea spells. By the time my daughter was born, I had a cybersecurity certification and a partial scholarship waiting. I named her Lena, after my mother's grandmother, a woman who once ran an underground shelter during the war and never asked for permission to save lives. Lena was tiny, furious, and perfect. She came into the world with her fists balled and her lungs full of rebellion. And every time I looked at her, I felt a storm settle in my chest. How could I ever tell her the truth that she came from a night I'd spent trying to survive? From a man who only saw me as leverage? I couldn't. So I didn't. I told her stories instead. Fairy tales where the queens wore uniforms and built empires from shattered beginnings, where wolves wore suits and tried to sweet-talk their way into castles, only to find the gates had turned to steel. I worked. I rose. Cyber Command noticed my skills before anyone else did. One late-night analysis I submitted under an alias caught the attention of a colonel named Rivers. He called me personally the next morning and said, "You're too good to be anonymous. Come to Fort Belvoir. Show me what else you can do." I kissed Lena's forehead and left her with my neighbor, promising I'd be back by dark. That was 4 years ago, at Fort Belvoir. I wore my first official uniform again, not as a private, not as a grunt, but as an analyst with clearance and a voice. I learned systems no one else could crack. I debugged firewalls blindfolded. I built defense layers like dominoes, each one strong enough to hold a nation's trust. But the past, it stayed with me, especially when Travis Bennett showed up, my new commanding officer. Travis was sharp, handsome in a political slick kind of way, and arrogant enough to assume every woman in uniform secretly wanted him. He introduced himself with a smirk and a handshake that lingered. "Matthew Sloane's a close friend of mine," he said casually. "We go way back." I hear you two worked together once I smiled. Neutral. Briefly. He grinned. He always did have good taste. That night, he invited me for drinks in the officer's lounge. I declined. 2 days later, he pulled me aside after morning briefing. Said my approach to network defense lacked collaborative spirit. I was reassigned to logistical support, paper pushing, schedule drafting, filing reports, a demotion in all but name. I didn't complain. Because I needed more time, more access. I started collecting patterns, backdoor pathways in contracts, subtle anomalies in requisition orders that pointed toward unauthorized tech integration. Someone was laundering code, and I had a suspicion where it was going. A7 Sentinel. I couldn't prove it yet, but I knew. Every line of code had a signature, and the one they used on Sentinel was mine, word for word. But why was Travis protecting Matthew? And what the hell were they hiding one night, deep into a stormy December shift? I stayed after hours and ran an isolated trace through the department sandbox environment. It led me back to a private shell company, Crontech Solutions, listed under a proxy firm. The contract liaison, Matthew Sloan. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just personal. It was criminal. They'd taken my work, laundered it through fake subcontractors, and sold it back to the government. And suddenly, I wasn't just a survivor. I was a witness, a threat. But how much longer could I keep this quiet before someone noticed I was watching? And if they did, how far would they go to shut me up? It started with the tire tracks in the snow. I left the command center at 0200 after a silent 10-hour shift in the cyber vault, my brain buzzing from caffeine and suppressed fury. The air was sharp, the kind of cold that burned your nostrils when you inhaled. I walked through the snow-dusted parking lot toward my car until I saw the footprints, not mine. They led to my driver's side door. Paused there. No tire marks leading in, just leading out. Someone had been waiting. I stopped breathing for a second. Glanced around. Nothing but the hum of halogen floodlights and the distant howl of wind. The door wasn't locked. That's the first thing that hit me. I always lock it. Inside, everything looked untouched until I noticed the glove box had been popped open and shut too neatly. My backup flash drive was gone. The one with my code logs, my personal notes, my original encryption keys from Raven Protocol. Shit. I drove home that night like I was being watched. Every turn, every stop sign. I imagined eyes in the rearview mirror. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly the leather left imprints on my palms. When I got back to the apartment, Lena was asleep, curled under her blanket. Her little arms wrapped around the stuffed lion I got her from the PX. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold air that seeped through our old windows. She stirred, just enough to whisper. Mama. I brushed her hair back and kissed her temple. I'm here. But I wasn't. Not really. Not anymore. They knew. I sat up the rest of the night with my laptop, scanning for breaches, checking access logs. Nothing direct. But someone had wiped remote backups I stored in a sandbox drive 3 days ago. Only someone inside the government network could have done that without a trace. That someone had clearance, and the only person who knew I was digging Travis. The next morning, he summoned me to his office. He was standing by the window, hands behind his back, wearing that smug confidence that never quite matched the stripes on his shoulder. Colonel Hart, he said without turning around. I hear you've been working some late hours. I've been auditing my projects, I replied calmly. He turned then, eyes narrowing just slightly. You know how easy it is to get lost in curiosity? And how dangerous that can be. There was a pause. Thick. Poisonous. He took a step closer, leaning on his desk. Look, Amelia, he said, switching to that mock-friendly tone I loathed. I get it. You're ambitious. Smart, hungry, it's sexy. My stomach tightened. You and I were on the same side, he continued. You keep playing the soldier card, and you'll miss the real game. You want to win. You play with the ones holding the cards. He reached forward, trailing his fingers across a folder labeled Project Sentinel. Confidential. I could help you, he whispered. There's a spot opening up at Defense Tech Labs. More pay, more influence. If you stopped digging. His eyes slid down my body like a scanner. I felt every millimeter of it. And what would I owe you for that? I asked, my voice low, even. He smirked. Just your loyalty. And maybe, one night, your company. He reached out, grazing the sleeve of my uniform. I stepped back. Not fast, not loud, just far enough to make him miss. I'll think about it, I said. Then I turned and walked out without waiting for dismissal. That night, I called an old contact at Cyber Counterintelligence, a friend from early training days, one of the few who still owed me a favor. I need protection, I told her, and a name wiped clean from a contractor list. Whose name, she asked? Mine, I said. And I need everything linked to Raven Protocol to go dark, immediately. She didn't ask why. Within 48 hours. The code trail was scorched. My fingerprints on it vanished. But so did my chance of proving authorship unless I moved now, before they buried it deeper. Which meant I had to play my card. The one I'd held for 6 years. The recording. I hadn't planned to keep it. But something told me that night in Matthew's office, his voice so sure, his hand so entitled I'd need proof someday. And now, with Sentinel spiraling toward full-scale approval, that day had arrived. I sent an encrypted file to my burner email with one instruction: if anything happens to me, release to DoD Inspector General and the press simultaneously. Then I packed a suitcase. I took Lena to her godmother's house across town, one of the few people I trusted, and kissed her goodbye. I'll be back in 2 days. I promised. Mama, she asked sleepily, are you going to war? I paused, then nodded. Something like that. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. Still, one question haunted me as I left the apartment. If Travis had gone this far to silence me, how far would Matthew go to protect what he stole? The lobby of Westera Systems was just as I remembered it. Marble floors so polished you could see your own hesitation in them. Receptionists with tight smiles and tighter suits, and an air of sterile power humming beneath every surface. But this time, I didn't walk in with a name tag and a coffee tray. I walked in as Colonel Amelia Hart, with a classified DoD clearance badge clipped to my lapel and fire in my stride. At the security gate, the young guard barely glanced up before standing at full attention. Good morning, ma'am. His voice cracked slightly. I nodded, passed him my clearance. He scanned it. Beep. Green light. The elevator ride to the executive floor was long, silent, and full of ghosts. I could still feel Matthew's palm on my lower back, his breath hot in my ear as he whispered all the things I'd now recorded and encrypted 3 times over. I could see his smirk as he slid that folder across the desk, the one he promised would change my life if I'd just be a little more grateful. I stepped into the hallway. Lorraine was waiting. Colonel Hart, she said, beaming with forced composure. Welcome back to Westera. We're honored. I could see the tension behind her eyes. She'd read the memo. She knew who I was and why I was here. I'm here to observe the final defense review, I said evenly, and to determine whether Sentinel meets federal security standards for deployment. Behind her. The conference room door opened. Matthew stood there in a tailored navy suit, tie perfect, jaw tight. He froze when he saw me. For a second, he looked like a man who'd been punched before the bell rang. Ma'am? He said stiffly, stepping aside to let me enter. He avoided eye contact. The room was full dozen stakeholders, engineers, compliance officers, consultants. I could feel their curiosity swirl when I walked to the front of the room and sat beside Lorraine at the head of the table. My name placard was already set. The meeting began. Matthew led the briefing. He talked about encryption upgrades, cross-departmental integration, and Phase 2 rollout projections. His tone was slick, practiced, and hollow. He gestured toward a screen behind him, technical charts, buzzwords, polished diagrams that meant absolutely nothing to anyone who'd ever written real code. Then I raised a hand. "Mr. Sloan," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Could you elaborate on the latency thresholds you referenced in the E4 integration layer?" He blinked, paused. "Latency thresholds. Yes. You said Sentinel maintains operational integrity within sub-200 millisecond response times under a Tier 3 threat load. I'd like to know how you tested that." He swallowed. "Our R&D team handled that portion. I can provide the documentation. You'll need to—" I said, "by end of day." He nodded, too quickly. Then I slid a folder across the table. "Inside this are 3 code segments from the current Sentinel build," I said. "They mirror Raven Protocol's foundational encryption word for word. Would you care to explain how that happened?" Silence. Lorraine leaned forward. "Are you accusing Westera of code theft?" "Colonel," I turned to her. "I'm stating a fact, and I'd like an explanation." Matthew opened his mouth, then shut it. His hands trembled as he reached for a glass of water. The room watched. Still. I wasn't done. I clicked on the projector remote. The screen behind me lit up. One file name, audio, log, row 6 sound 7 wave. I hit play. The room filled with the sound of Matthew's voice, low, silky, and undeniably real. "If you want to go far here, Amelia, you need to be smart. I can open doors for you, but you need to know how to repay that kind of opportunity." A sharp inhale from someone across the table. "You're not just some intern. You're special. But let's be honest, tight blouses and sharp minds, that combo's dangerous in all the right ways." The audio ended. Matthew's face drained of color. Lorraine stood, slow, controlled. "Mr. Sloan, is that your voice?" He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. I turned to the rest of the room. "I have copies of this recording, along with backup documentation. If internal review is not initiated within 48 hours, it will be escalated to the Inspector General's office and the Department of Justice." Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Matthew tried to gather himself. "This is a personal vendetta. She's twisting." "No," I cut him off. "This is consequence." His jaw flexed, hands clenching. For a moment, he looked like he might lunge, scream, do something violent. But all he did was sit stiff, pale, defeated. Travis wasn't in the room. He never showed. Coward. Lorraine finally spoke again. "Colonel Hart, will comply with all requests. Full access. Immediate review." I nodded. "Then let's begin." I didn't glance at Matthew as I packed up my files. I didn't need to. The war was no longer in whispers or corner offices or locked doors. It was here, in fluorescent light, with witnesses. But still, as I stepped out of that building, a question lingered in my mind like smoke after fire. Why did Matthew look like he'd already lost something worse than his job? And what exactly was he hiding about Sentinel? That I hadn't uncovered yet. I didn't sleep that night. Back in my hotel room overlooking the East River, I sat by the window with my boots still on, laptop open, and a bourbon I hadn't touched sweating on the side table. The audio recording had detonated like a controlled charge, but I could feel it in my gut. That wasn't the full explosion. Not yet. Travis still hadn't surfaced. No emails, no pushback, no threats. Too quiet. I knew his kind. Men like him didn't retreat. They regrouped. At 02:11 my burner phone lit up with a restricted call. I let it ring twice before answering. "Colonel Hart," came a familiar voice. Too familiar, smooth, practiced, poisonous. "Matthew," I said. A pause. "I want to talk. You had 6 years. Face to face. Not here. Somewhere neutral." "Why? Because you've only uncovered half the story," he said. "And if you're going to bring down Sentinel, you need to understand what you're actually holding." He hung up before I could respond. The next morning, against better judgment, or maybe because of it, I agreed to meet. Neutral ground. A cafe in Lower Manhattan. Public. Cameras. Witnesses. He looked smaller. Not physically, but diminished. His jaw wasn't as square as I remembered. The suit fit too perfectly, like armor instead of confidence. His eyes scanned the room constantly, the way men do when they know their power is slipping. "Before you say anything," he started, "you were right. About the audio, about the code." I waited. "I deserve the fallout coming. But there's something you don't know. You mean something you haven't tried to bury yet." He sighed. Travis didn't just protect me. He was in on it. The Raven Protocol code wasn't just stolen. It was sold. My breath caught. To who his voice dropped. "Overseas." I felt my blood go cold. "China." He shook his head. "Private buyers. Arms brokers. People who wanted access to U.S. infrastructure vulnerabilities. Sentinel was never just a defense project. It's got dormant keys. Keys you wrote. Keys someone else is trying to activate." I stared at him, stunned. "You gave them access to the back doors." "No," he said, quickly. "But Travis did, I think." I narrowed my eyes. "You think he leaned in?" "We started selling low-level access logs through dummy contracts. It was just profit at first. But then Travis wanted deeper keys. Said he had buyers. I never gave him yours, I swear. But he could have, easily. If he had the right flash drive, the one stolen from my car." Suddenly, everything clicked. That wasn't about silencing me. It was about activation. Sentinel was going live in less than a month. And if the stolen backdoors were built into the rollout, we weren't looking at corporate theft anymore. We were looking at a cyber attack from within. I stood, too fast. The chair scraped loudly behind me. "You're going to write a sworn statement," I said, heart pounding. "Everything. Names, dates, contracts. And then you're going to disappear before the military tribunal gets to you." Matthew didn't argue. Because he knew what I knew. He wasn't the monster anymore. Travis was. And the only way to stop what was coming was to go deeper than I'd ever gone. Back at base, I pulled every emergency contact I had. I briefed Cyber Command in a locked SCOF unit. We initiated Operation Glass Veil, a code-level protocol designed to isolate Sentinel's core and scan for unauthorized access ports. Within hours, we found them. 3 nodes, hidden beneath sandbox environments with forged department seals. Each one pointing to Crontech Solutions, Travis's private holding company. The one buried under 6 layers of shell corporations. He was going to flip Sentinel into a Trojan horse, and I'd given him the key. 6 years ago, when I left that flash drive behind, he was counting on me staying silent, on me being scared, on me thinking this had been about Matthew's hands on my skin. But it was bigger than that. It had always been bigger than that. I requested full authority under Emergency Cybersecurity Directive 12B. Granted. A joint task force was deployed to intercept all Sentinel testing. And Travis, he vanished. Phone off. Apartment cleared. Access revoked. I stood in the war room, watching red lines flash across the digital command center screen. And I realized the trap had been built around me all along, but now I had the bait. I pulled up the last email he'd ever sent from his secure line. A file, untitled, encrypted. I opened it. Inside, there was only a photo. A little girl. Brown hair, gray eyes, wearing a small silver necklace I'd lost 3 years ago. The image was time-stamped 2 weeks ago. My knees nearly buckled. He had Lena. Somehow. Some way. He'd gotten close. He'd found her. The final card he never played. Until now. The screen blurred. Everything else, Matthew, Sentinel, Raven Protocol became static. All that mattered now was getting her back. But how long had Travis known, and what the hell was he planning to do with my daughter? I didn't wait for permission. Within the hour, I was in a black SUV racing down I-95 toward a private airstrip in Delaware, my team scrambling behind me to track any digital trace of Travis Bennett. None of them knew yet what that photo meant, what it implied. But I knew. The timestamp, the necklace, the look in Lena's eyes somewhere between tired and afraid he had her. And this wasn't about leverage anymore. This was personal. We pinged a last known location, a decommissioned data center once used by Crontech Solutions, just outside Annapolis. On paper, it had gone dark months ago, but satellite data told a different story movement. Irregular power spikes, thermal readings in the sub-basement. That's where he was hiding. That's where she was. By 1600 hours, I was in tactical gear, earpiece active, sidearm locked. We moved in silence, 4 federal agents, 2 cyber commandos, and me. No sirens, no warnings, just quiet, focused vengeance. The door was locked with a biometric pad, Travis's own security system. It took less than a minute to bypass. The interior was stripped down, cables gutted, screens cracked, dust covering everything. But the sub-level still powered, still pulsing. We descended. And there he was, Travis Bennett, leaning against a server rack like he'd been expecting me all along. He looked thinner, grayer, like the guilt was finally starting to rot him from the inside out. "Took you long enough," he said. "Where is she?" I snapped, my gun already raised. He didn't flinch, just pointed to the far room behind him. "She's safe. For now." 2 agents rushed past him, clearing the hallway. I stormed forward, heart pounding, vision sharp. I pushed open the door, and there she was. Lena, sitting on a worn sofa, watching an old cartoon on a tablet, her face lighting up the second she saw me. "Mama." I dropped my weapon. I ran to her. I knelt, pulling her into my arms, breathing her in, whispering, "You're okay. You're safe. I've got you." She clung to me, small arms wrapping tight around my neck. I wanted to cry. I didn't. There was no time. Back in the server room, Travis was being cuffed. I turned to him, fury bubbling in my chest. "You brought a child into this." I spat. "You used my daughter." He laughed dry, bitter. "You were always smarter than the rest, but you never learned the rule. Amelia Power isn't what you build. It's what you're willing to sacrifice." "You're right," I said, "and that's why you lost." He stopped smiling. I stepped closer. So close he had no choice but to look at me. I didn't sacrifice my daughter. I protected her. I didn't sell my code. I defended it. And I didn't sleep my way to the top. I climbed here. Every step through mud and blood and assholes like you. He tried to say something, but I cut him off. "You're not the game. You're the warning." He was taken away. And just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, at a federal tribunal, Both Matthew Sloan and Travis Bennett were indicted on charges ranging from fraud and espionage to child endangerment and conspiracy against national security. Their companies were dismantled, their reputations annihilated. And me, I received a formal commendation for preventing the largest internal cyber breach in U.S. defense history. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory came one quiet night back in D.C. when I tucked Lena into bed in our new apartment, 3 bedrooms, sunlight pouring in, medals on the shelf where her drawings also lived. She looked up at me and said, "Mama, are you done being a soldier?" Now I smiled. "No, baby. I'll always be a soldier. But now I fight in different ways." She nodded, like she understood more than her age should allow. And then she asked, softly, "Who's my daddy?" I paused. I could have lied. I almost did. But then I said, "He was a man who didn't know what to do with strength like yours." She blinked. "Like mine," I touched her chest. "Exactly like yours." She smiled and rolled over, clutching her lion. I watched her sleep, and I knew something sacred, something unshakable. I never needed their validation. Not Matthew, not Travis, not the world, because real power isn't given. It's earned quietly, painfully, relentlessly. I turned pain into strategy, shame into fuel, and silence into proof. So if you ever feel underestimated, discarded, or erased, remember this. Let them look down on you. Let them call you nothing. Because one day, when you walk back in, taller, stronger, unshakable, they'll have no choice but to look up and call you ma'am.